A cruel act at sea shocks everyone, but when a caramel stray dog challenges the waves, the impossible happens. What seemed to be the end turns into a twist that no one could have predicted. The sun was beginning to set in Newport Cove, painting the sky with orange hues that reflected on the crystal-clear waters. Blake Thompson observed the landscape from the veranda of his mansion. At 28, he was the heir to the Thompson shipping empire, one of the most powerful in the country. "Blake, your father is on the phone," the housekeeper approached timidly. "Tell him I'm busy," he replied without taking his eyes off the horizon, taking a sip of his imported whiskey. That night, his yacht, the Emperor, would host yet another extravagant party. Blake was known for his celebrations that began at dusk and only ended when the sun was already high in the sky the following day. While getting ready, his phone rang. It was Patricia, his most recent conquest. "I'm excited for the party, Blake. Will you finally introduce me officially to your friends?" "Patricia, we've talked about this. Don't mix things up, it's just a party." On the other side of town, at the small fisherman's dock, old Joe finished tying up his boat. At 60, he was respected by everyone in the community. A widower, he dedicated his life to little Timmy, his 2-year-old son, who was born visually impaired. "Come. On, my boy, time to go home," he adjusted the child in his arms. "Is Buddy coming too, Daddy?" asked the little one, referring to the tan mutt that always accompanied them. "Of course, he never leaves us behind." At the same dock, Jack Shaw, a 35-year-old fisherman, was unloading the results of his day's work. Known for his sharp intuition for storms and good fishing spots, Jack had a strong sense of justice and immense respect for the sea. "Old Joe, need any help with the little one?" he offered, approaching. "No, Jack, thank you. Buddy and I can manage. Aren't you going to rest?" "Not yet. Something tells me I should stay around here a bit longer today." Meanwhile, Blake's yacht was already anchored in one of Newport Cove's most isolated bays. The loud music echoed throughout the bay, and guests arrived in private speedboats. Among them was Richard Miller, a 30-year-old lawyer, and perhaps the only one who still maintained some sense of morality in the group. "Blake, don't you think you're overdoing it with the drinking?" Richard commented, seeing the host already staggering. "Relax, Richard. The night has just begun. Besides, I'm the one paying your bills, so spare me the sermon." The party continued into the night. Blake, already drunk, climbed onto a table to make an announcement. "My dear friends, today we're going to prove that the world truly belongs to those with power. Who's with me?" The guests applauded, not knowing exactly what he intended. That's when Blake spotted a small boat approaching. It was old Joe, who had been called to make an emergency repair on one of the speedboat engines. "Look who's here!" "The old man from the dock with his little life project," Blake mocked, pointing to Joe and Timmy. Old Joe tried to ignore it, concentrating on making the repair quickly. Buddy, always alert, remained in the boat, watching attentively. "Hey, old man, bring the kid up here. I want to show him something," shouted Blake. "Sir, with all due respect, I'm just doing my job. Let me finish so we can leave." Blake didn't accept the refusal. He stumbled down and, without warning, took Timmy from old Joe's arms. The child began to cry, frightened. "Blake, what do you think you're doing?" Richard intervened, concerned. "I'm going to show all of you what happens to the weak in this world," Blake replied with an empty look. The crowd watched in silence, a mixture of curiosity and apprehension taking over the environment. Joe begged for his son back, while Blake walked to the edge of the yacht with Timmy in his arms. "This is the real world, my friends, where the powerful decide the fate of the insignificant," declared Blake, holding the child up for all to see. That's when time seemed to stop. Little Timmy, frightened, let out a scream that echoed across the water, a sound that no one there would ever forget. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit like. Let us know what city you're watching. Us from we continue. "Blake, stop this now," Richard shouted, trying to advance but was held back by 2 security guards. Time seemed to slow down when Blake, in a thoughtless gesture, threw Timmy into the sea. The impact of the small body on the water was followed by a sepulchral silence. No one dared to breathe. "My son!" Old Joe's cry tore through the night as he desperately tried to jump from the boat, prevented by the height of the yacht. "For God's sake, save my son!" Buddy, the tan mutt that always accompanied old Joe, didn't hesitate. With a determined bark, he jumped from the smaller vessel straight into the dark water, swimming furiously toward the spot where Timmy had fallen. Aboard the yacht, shock turned to chaos. Some guests screamed in horror. Others remained, paralyzed by disbelief. Richard, taking advantage of the confusion, pulled out his phone and began filming everything. Blake's empty stare, the reaction of those present, old Joe's desperation, and especially the dog swimming toward the child. "Call the Coast Guard. Someone do something." A guest shouted, but no one seemed able to act. Blake, suddenly aware of the gravity of his act, tried to regain control of the situation. "Everyone calm down. It was just a joke. The kid will be fine." His tone, once arrogant, now trembled. Not far from there, Jack Shaw was sailing back to port in his small boat. The starry sky normally calmed him, but that night an uneasiness accompanied him. That's when he heard desperate barking echoing over the water. "Something's wrong over there," he muttered to himself, adjusting his course toward the sounds. As he approached, the scene he found froze his blood. A dog struggling to keep something afloat, something he soon recognized as a child. "My God!" Jack accelerated to maximum speed, arriving in just a few seconds. With precise movements, he hauled first the child and then the exhausted dog into his boat. Timmy coughed and cried, soaked and frightened, but he was alive. Buddy, also drenched, didn't leave the boy's side, as if he still wanted to protect him. "Hang in there, little one, I'll get you to shore." On the yacht, Richard had managed to gain a privileged position to capture everything on video, including the moment when Jack rescued Timmy. Beside him, Patricia, the woman who had hoped to be introduced as Blake's girlfriend, looked horrified. "What did he do?" she whispered, incredulous. "Showed who he really is," Richard replied, without taking his eyes off the phone screen. Blake, realizing that the situation was completely spiraling out of his control, began giving orders. "I want everyone out of here now. The party's over. And if anyone comments on what happened here, you'll regret it." Old Joe, still in the small boat, spotted Jack rescuing his son. With his heart pounding, he rowed frantically toward them. "Timmy, my son!" When he finally reached Jack's boat, he hugged the little one with all his strength, tears streaming down his wrinkled face. "Thank you, Jack. Thank God." Buddy, soaked but visibly proud, wagged his tail, receiving pets from both men. "Old Joe, we need to take the boy to the hospital, and then to the police. What happened here can't go unpunished," said Jack, determination in his gaze. Back on the yacht, guests began to disperse, many already deleting the party photos and videos from their phones, fearful of being associated with what had occurred. But not Richard. Hidden in a corner, he was finalizing the upload of the video to his social media. "I got your message, Blake," he muttered to himself. "The world really does belong to those with power, but today you're going to learn that there are powers greater than money." In the main cabin, Blake poured himself another drink, his hands trembling. For the first time in his privileged life, he felt fear, not for the child, whom he knew had been rescued, but for the consequences that might arise. "Mr. Thompson," one of the crew approached him cautiously. "I just received a call. The video of the incident, it's going viral." Blake dropped his glass, shattering it on the floor. "What video?" he asked, his voice almost disappearing. "The lawyer, your friend Richard. He filmed everything and posted it online. It already has thousands of shares." At that moment, Blake's phone began ringing incessantly. On the screen, the name he feared most at that moment: Dad. The night in Newport Cove, which had begun like so many others in his life of excess, was now transforming into the beginning of his downfall. And as the yacht hastily departed from the bay, the lights of the coastal town began to illuminate, with the news that would soon shock the entire United States. The next morning, Newport Cove awoke in turmoil. Richard's video had spread like wildfire. On the streets, in businesses, on beaches, everyone was talking about the same thing: the Thompson heir and his unthinkable cruelty against an innocent child. At the city hospital, Timmy had spent the night under observation. Old Joe, with deep dark circles under his eyes, hadn't left his side for a second. Jack Shaw was there too, as was Buddy, who had somehow managed to enter the hospital and refused to leave the room. "Old Joe, the reporters are outside. They want to speak with you," the nurse informed him with a concerned expression. "I don't want to talk to anyone, I just want to stay with my son." Jack placed his hand on the old mariner's shoulder. "You don't have to, but I'll go out there. Someone has to tell our version before the Thompson family starts distorting the facts." At the Thompson mansion, the patriarch Roger paced back and forth in his luxurious office. On the television, all stations were showing the video of the incident and discussing the possible legal consequences. The phone on his desk wouldn't stop ringing. It was associates, business partners, and political figures cancelling meetings and breaking agreements. "Where is my son?" he asked the housekeeper, who seemed as shaken as he was. "In his room, sir. He arrived an hour ago but didn't want to talk to anyone." Roger climbed the stairs with heavy steps. Without knocking, he opened the door to Blake's room, finding him sitting on the edge of the bed, his gaze lost. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" The father's voice came out strangled, a mixture of anger and despair. "In one night, you destroyed what took me decades to build." Blake didn't answer. It seemed that reality was finally hitting him. The company's stock fell 30% in just 2 hours. Our main investors are jumping ship. The governor just called me cancelling all contracts with the government. "Dad, I can explain." "Explain?" Roger shouted, completely losing his composure. "The entire country saw you throw a blind child into the sea. How do you explain that?" At Richard's small house, the doorbell rang non-stop. Journalists from all outlets competed for an exclusive interview with the man who had exposed Blake Thompson. "Mr. Miller, why did you decide to record and share the video?" asked a reporter when he finally opened the door. "Because it was time someone showed who Blake Thompson really is. For years, I witnessed his arrogance and cruelty grow without limits. Yesterday was just the culmination." Meanwhile, at the fisherman's dock, a crowd was forming. People from all parts of town brought flowers, toys, and signs of support for Old Joe and Timmy. Among them, one woman stood out, Claire Morgan, a local veterinarian known for her work with assistance animals. "Jack, I need to meet this dog," she said upon finding the fisherman among the crowd. "What he did is extraordinary. Few dogs would have the instinct and courage to act like that." "Claire, now is not the time. The family is going through a trauma." "I understand, but I have a proposal that might help them. I work with guide dog training. Buddy has shown incredible potential." Back at the Thompson mansion, the situation was worsening by the minute. Roger hung up another call, his face pale. "That was the board of directors. They voted unanimously for your removal from the company." He turned to his son. "And for mine too, if I don't take drastic measures." "What measures?" Blake asked, feeling a chill. "As of today, you are disinherited. Your access to the family accounts will be blocked. I want you out of this house in 2 hours." "Dad, you can't do this. I'm your son." "A son I no longer recognize. You will learn the value of honest work, humility, and respect for others." At the hospital, Timmy was finally discharged. As they left the room, Old Joe carrying his son in his arms and Buddy faithfully following, they were surprised by a crowd of supporters. "Old Joe, we're with you. Justice for Timmy. Buddy, national hero." The old mariner moved, couldn't contain his tears. Jack made a path through the people, guiding them to a car that was waiting. "Where are we going?" asked Joe, confused. "To my house. It's not safe for you to go back to the dock now. The press won't leave you alone." As the car drove away, on the opposite shore of the bay, Blake was leaving through the back of his family's mansion. He carried only a backpack with clothes and some personal belongings. For the first time in his life, he was alone, without money, and with nowhere to go. His phone vibrated. It was a notification from an online newspaper. Roger Thompson disowns son after shocking video. The article included an official statement from the businessman, distancing himself completely from his son's actions and announcing $1 million donation to institutions supporting children with disabilities. Blake sat on a bench in the Central Plaza, feeling the looks of disapproval from passers-by who recognized him. The town that once idolized him now despised him, and he, for the first time, began to feel the weight of his own actions. 3 days had passed since the incident. Blake wandered the streets of Newport Cove, sleeping on park benches and avoiding crowded places. His face, once a symbol of power and privilege, now appeared in all the newspapers as an example of cruelty and arrogance. The few dollars he had quickly ran out, and hunger began to gnaw at him. On a rainy morning, Blake spotted the fish market. Perhaps there, amid the hustle and bustle of fishermen and buyers, he could go unnoticed and find some work. With his hood partially covering his face, he approached one of the stalls. "Need help unloading the boat? I'll pay $30 for the morning," said the stall owner without looking at him. "I'll take it," Blake replied quickly. The man raised his eyes, instantly recognizing him. "You? Thompson?" His expression changed to contempt. "Get out of here. Nobody at this dock will give you work." The scene repeated itself at other stalls. Blake, humiliated, was about to give up when a familiar voice surprised him. "Looking for work, Thompson?" It was Jack Shaw carrying several boxes of fish. Blake hesitated, but hunger spoke louder. "Yes, nobody wants to give me a chance." "And why should it be any different? You've had too many chances in life already." Jack stared at him deeply. "But I have a proposal. I need someone to clean the dock and the boats. The work is hard, the pay is little, and nobody will respect you. Still interested?" At Jack's house, which had become a temporary refuge for old Joe and Timmy, Claire Morgan was examining Buddy with professional attention. "He's extraordinary, old Joe. He has the perfect temperament to become a service dog. With proper training, he could transform Timmy's life." The old mariner watched his son playing with the dog. Since the incident, Timmy had become more withdrawn, startling at loud noises and crying during the night. Only in Buddy's presence did he seem calm. "The training is expensive, Doctor. I can't afford it. That's why I'm here. Your story has moved the entire country. I've secured sponsorship from various companies, willing to finance not only Buddy's training, but the creation of a training center here in Newport Cove." Old Joe, emotional, couldn't respond immediately. The idea that something so good could emerge from such a traumatic experience seemed almost impossible to believe. At the dock, Blake faced his first day of real work. His hands, once soft and well cared for, were now full of blisters and cuts. The sun punished his skin unaccustomed to outdoor work, and the looks of contempt from the fishermen followed him wherever he went. "You call that clean?" Jack pointed to the still dirty deck of one of the boats. "Do it right, Thompson. Here, nobody has a nanny to fix your mistakes." Blake gritted his teeth, containing the rude response he wanted to give. Instead, he picked up the mop again and restarted the, "Why are you doing this?" he asked Jack as he was walking away. "Why give me work when everyone wants to see me in the gutter?" Jack turned slowly. "Because I believe everyone deserves a chance to change, even you, Thompson. But that chance you'll have to earn with sweat." At tea. Night, exhausted and hungry, Blake received his first payment, just enough for a simple meal and a thin mattress in the small storage shed at the dock, where Jack allowed him to sleep. Meanwhile, news about the new training center for service dogs was spreading. Claire, with her experience and contacts, had managed to mobilize resources and support from various parts of the country. The project was rapidly taking shape. "We're looking for a suitable location," explained Claire during dinner at Jack's house. "It needs to be spacious, preferably near the water, as will include aquatic therapy in the program." "The old Thompson Yacht Club would be perfect," commented Jack, thoughtful. "It's been abandoned since the company started failing." "Impossible. Even in crisis, the Thompson family would never cede that space." In the dock storage shed, Blake couldn't sleep. Jack's words echoed in his mind, along with images of what he had done. For the first time, he allowed himself to relive the moment he threw Timmy into the water, not as the powerful protagonist he believed himself to be, but as an external observer. What he saw disgusted him. The next morning, while cleaning another boat's deck, Blake noticed Buddy watching him from a distance. The dog, now a local celebrity, kept his distance, as if assessing his presence. "He knows who you are," said old Joe, appearing behind Blake. Dogs sense things that we humans can't see. Blake froze. It was the first time he had encountered Timmy's father since the incident. He expected shouting, accusations, maybe even violence. Instead, he found a tired, sad look that penetrated him deeply. "Old Joe, The words failed. What could he say to compensate for what he had done? "Don't say anything, boy. Words don't change the past. It's actions that define who we really are." With that, the old mariner walked away, leaving Blake in a disturbing silence, observed only by Buddy's attentive eyes, which seemed to see far beyond his arrogant facade. 2 months had passed. Winter was coming to Newport Cove, bringing constant rain and unusual cold for the region. Blake continued working at the dock, now not just as a janitor but helping with boat maintenance. His hands had developed calluses, and his face, once pale from the comfort of air-conditioned environments, now displayed a tan typical of someone who works outdoors. Gradually, the fishermen's hostility diminished, not because they forgave him, but because his constant presence and silent work slowly became part of the landscape. Blake had also changed internally. The nights in the small storage shed had transformed into moments of forced reflection, where he no longer had the luxury of escaping his own thoughts. "Thompson, I need you to take these provisions to Ted's boat," ordered Jack, pointing to several heavy boxes. "He's going to be at sea for 3 days. "Right away," replied Blake, without the irritation that would have once accompanied such an order. While carrying the boxes, he noticed an unusual movement in the plaza opposite the dock. Several people gathered around an improvised table, where Claire Morgan was apparently presenting something. "What's happening over there?" he asked one of the fishermen. "The vet is showing the project for the service dog training center. Everyone is excited, but they seem to be having problems finding a suitable location." Blake finished his task, and driven by a curiosity he himself didn't understand, approached the gathering. He kept his distance, watching Claire point to plans and drawings. "The ideal would be a space like this," she explained, showing a model of a waterfront complex, "with training areas, dog accommodation, and space for complementary therapies. Looks like the old Thompson Club," commented someone in the audience. "Yes, it would be perfect, but unfortunately, it's out of the question. The property is in legal dispute now that the company is in bankruptcy proceedings." Blake felt a tightness in his chest. The yacht club had been his personal playground throughout his childhood. It was where his father had taught him to swim, to sail, to behave like a true Thompson. Now it was abandoned, just like him. That night, Blake couldn't sleep. For the first time since his fall, he felt a different restlessness. It wasn't self-pity, but something that resembled a purpose. The next morning, he woke up early, and instead of going directly to his tasks at the dock, walked to the adjacent beach. There he noticed something he had never noticed before, a group of stray dogs that frequented the place in search of food scraps left by tourists. Impulsively, he shared his modest breakfast with the hungry animals. One of them, particularly thin and suspicious, kept its distance, observing him with cautious eyes, very similar to how Buddy observed him. "You know who I am too, don't you?" Blake murmured to the dog, which continued to keep its distance. In the following days, Blake established a routine. Before work, he would set aside some of his food for the beach dogs. The suspicious animal, which he came to call Shadow, gradually approached, though never close enough to be touched. One day, Jack surprised him in this activity. "So, that's how you spend your salary? Feeding strays?" Blake expected sarcasm, but Jack's tone was more curious than critical. "They don't have anyone," he replied simply. Jack nodded as if understanding something profound in that simple gesture. "Did you know that Buddy was also a stray? Old Joe found him half dead on the beach 3 years ago. Now look what he's become." Blake remained silent, absorbing that information. The dog that had saved Timmy wasn't a special breed, hadn't been trained for rescues. He was just a stray that someone decided to give a chance. In the center of town, the Service Dog Training Center project was gaining more and more support. Claire had secured significant donations from local business people, and even national celebrities moved by the story. All that was missing was the ideal physical space. "I had an idea," commented Jack during a meeting with Claire and old Joe. What if we tried to speak directly with Roger Thompson? Despite everything, he has shown himself to be genuinely sorry for his son's actions. Do you really think he would receive us? Questioned old Joe, skeptical. It doesn't hurt to try. The worst that can happen is getting a no. The following morning, to everyone's surprise, Roger Thompson appeared at the dock. His luxury car completely clashed with the simple environment of the fisherman. The businessman, visibly aged by recent events, walked hesitantly to Jack. I received your message, he said, extending his hand. I want to know about this project. Blake, who was stacking fishing nets nearby, froze when he saw his father. It was the first time he had encountered him since his expulsion. Instinctively, he retreated into the shadows, not wanting to be seen. Claire explained the project to Roger in detail, showing the plans, the sustainability strategy, and especially the social impact it would have on the community. You must understand, Mr. Thompson, that this center can transform the lives of hundreds of visually impaired children, and it all started because of Buddy. Roger remained silent, processing the information. His eyes wandered around the dock briefly, stopping on Blake, who hadn't managed to hide completely. The yacht club is in legal dispute, as you must know, but I still have enough influence to resolve this. He paused. I'll donate the space for the project, on one condition. Which is, asked Claire anxiously, that my son be part of it, not as a decorative figure or to clear his name, but working for real. I see he's here, and from what they tell me he's trying to change. This could be his real chance at redemption. The proposal fell like a bomb. Jack and Claire exchanged worried looks, while old Joe maintained an impassive expression. Blake, who had heard everything, felt a confused mixture of emotions: surprise, hope, shame. It's a decision that's not just up to us, Jack finally replied. We need to consult the community, especially old Joe and Timmy. Roger nodded. I understand. I'll await your answer. Before leaving, he looked directly at his son. Whatever their decision, I'm proud of what you're trying to become, Blake. When the car left, Blake emerged from the shadows, confronting the gazes now fixed on him. I didn't ask for this, he said, his voice trembling. If you don't want me in the project, I completely understand. To his surprise, it was old Joe who answered. Has Buddy accepted you? Blake, confused, hesitated. What do you mean? The beach dogs. Do they let you approach them? One of them, Shadow, is starting to trust me. The others already eat from my hand. Old Joe exchanged a significant look with Claire. Then maybe there's hope for you too, boy. The decision wasn't easy. For a week, the community was divided between those who believed in the possibility of redemption and those who considered Blake's presence an affront to Timmy's family. Heated meetings took place at the community center, with fervent opinions on both sides. How can we trust him after what he did? Questioned one of the older fishermen, receiving murmurs of agreement. It's not about trusting, but about giving. Our chance, argued Claire. Besides, without the donation of the club, the project could take years to materialize. Blake kept himself away from these discussions, continuing his work at the dock and his routine with the stray dogs. Each day, more animals approached him, including Shadow, who finally allowed himself to be petted. This small victory meant more to Blake than any previous achievement in his privileged life. It was on one of these mornings, while feeding the dogs, that Timmy appeared on the beach, guided by Buddy, who now wore an official training vest. Old Joe watched from a distance, allowing his son to gain more independence. Who's there? Asked the boy, sensing Blake's presence. Blake froze, not knowing how to react. Since the incident, he had never been so close to the child he had almost destroyed. It's Blake, he finally answered, his voice almost disappearing. To his surprise, Timmy showed no fear. Are you the man who feeds the dogs? Buddy always wants to come here in the morning. Yes, that's me. Blake observed how Buddy, although alert, didn't show the same hostility as before. They don't have anyone to take care of them. Timmy smiled, extending his hand toward the animals. Can I feed one too? Blake took a piece of bread and placed it in the small hand. Of course, this is Shadow. He's a bit shy. To the surprise of both, Shadow approached without hesitation and gently took the food from Timmy's hand. The boy laughed, delighted with the sensation of the dog's whiskers touching his fingers. Old Joe, who was watching the scene, felt something change within him. There was an undeniable path to forgiveness, he realized, even if it was still long and difficult. That night, the decision was made. Blake would be accepted into the project, starting with the most basic position, kennel caretaker, under Claire's constant supervision. "It's not a second chance," Jack explained when he communicated the decision to Blake. "It's a first chance to be someone different." Renovation work on the yacht club began immediately. Roger Thompson, true to his word, not only gave up the space, but also mobilized contacts to accelerate the necessary adaptations. The place that once symbolized the exclusive privilege of the rich was now transforming into a center of inclusion and hope. Blake dove into the work with a dedication that surprised everyone. He woke up before dawn, took care of the beach dogs, and then went to the center, where he spent the day cleaning, building, learning. His nights were dedicated to studying canine behavior and basic training techniques. "You have a way with them," observed Claire after seeing him calm a particularly nervous dog. "They sense when someone is genuinely interested in their well-being." Blake just nodded, still uncomfortable with compliments. Each small progress seemed like a drop in the ocean of damage he had caused. 2 weeks after the work began, Richard appeared at the center. The lawyer, whose video had triggered all the transformation in Blake's life, was accompanied by a news crew. "We've come to do a story about the project," he explained to Claire, deliberately ignoring Blake's presence. "Buddy's story continues to inspire the country." The camera followed every step of Buddy, now a national star, as he performed training exercises with Timmy. The boy, increasingly confident, showed how the dog helped him navigate obstacles and recognize environments. "He knows when I'm sad," Timmy explained to the reporter. "And he takes me to Daddy or to the beach, where the other dogs are." "And what are your plans for the future of this center?" the journalist asked Claire. "We want it to be not just a training facility, but a space for inclusion. Schools will be able to bring children to learn about accessibility, and visually impaired people from all over the country will be able to come meet our dogs." During the interview, Richard finally confronted Blake, who was trying to stay away from the cameras. "So, this is your new role? From villain to savior of abandoned dogs?" Blake held the gaze of his former friend. "I'm not trying to save anyone, Richard. I'm just trying to be useful in some way." Richard laughed with disdain. "Do you really think this makes up for what you did? No, nothing will make up for it. But I'm not doing this to redeem myself, but because I discovered that I care about these animals. Maybe it's the first time in my life I really care about something beyond myself." The sincerity in the response made Richard hesitate. He expected to find the same manipulative Blake as before, but there was something different about the man in front of him, something that left him uncomfortably speechless. At night, after the news crew left, Old Joe appeared at the improvised lodging where Blake now lived within the center itself. "We need to talk, boy," he said, sitting down beside him. "I saw how you spoke to the lawyer today, and how you've been dedicated to the animals." Blake waited, tense, imagining if he would finally be confronted for what he had done. "Timmy asked if you could help with Buddy's training tomorrow," continued the old mariner. "He said Buddy seems to like you now." Blake felt a lump in his throat. "He isn't afraid of me." "Children have a capacity for forgiveness that we adults lose over the course of life," replied Old Joe with a deep sigh. "I'm not saying I've forgotten what happened, but I see that you're trying, and for me, who has spent a life at sea, I know that sometimes the most violent storms bring to the surface treasures that were hidden in the depths." When Old Joe left, Blake remained motionless for a long time, the old mariner's words echoing in his mind. For the first time since the incident, he allowed himself to cry. Not out of self-pity, but from an emotion he couldn't name, something between gratitude and a deep, painful desire to be worthy of the chance he was being given. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit like. Let us know what city you're watching us from. We continue. 6 months had passed since the work began. The Buddy Training Center, named in honor of the dog that had become a national symbol, was ready for its official inauguration. What was once an exclusive yacht club now housed modern facilities for guide dog training, therapeutic spaces, and a free veterinary clinic for stray animals. Blake had earned Claire's trust enough to become one of the assistant trainers, working mainly with dogs rescued from the streets, including Shadow, who surprisingly showed aptitude for becoming an emotional support dog. Blake's transformation was evident not only in his appearance, now simpler and more functional, but mainly in his posture. Arrogance had given way to a quiet determination, and disdain had been replaced by genuine humility. On the morning of the inauguration, the center was full. Authorities, press, local residents, and families with disabled children from various parts of the country attended. Buddy, still the protagonist, posed patiently for photos alongside Timmy, who now, at almost 3 years old, showed impressive poise despite his visual impairment. "Nervous?" Jack asked Blake, who was keeping away from the main commotion. "A little," he admitted. "I still don't feel comfortable with so many people around." "I understand. But know that a large part of this place's success is also your merit. I've seen your work with the dogs. You really have a gift." Before Blake could respond, Patricia, his ex-conquest who had been on the yacht that fateful night, approached. She was part of the team of a major circulation magazine covering the event. "Blake, can we talk?" she asked with a serious expression. Reluctantly, he agreed. They walked to a quieter area of the gardens. "I need to tell you something," she began, noticeably uncomfortable. "Something about that night." Blake tensed. "What more would there be to know? I've already been judged by everyone, including myself." "It's not about what you did," she hesitated. "It's about what happened before." Blake's confused expression encouraged her to continue. "That night, before you threw Timmy into the sea, I saw Richard putting something in your drink. I thought it was just a joke between friends, maybe a stronger drink. But afterwards, when everything happened, and I saw how you were different, I realized it could be something more." Blake blinked several times, trying to process the information. "Are you saying Richard drugged me?" "I'm not absolutely certain, but he and the others were laughing, saying you needed to loosen up after the incident. When I saw the video he recorded, I began to suspect that maybe he knew you would do something thoughtless." The revelation hit Blake like lightning. Fragmented memories of that night, the sensation of being outside his body, the extreme impulsivity, the absence of any moral filter, now made disturbing sense. "Why are you telling me this now?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "Because I've seen how you've changed, how you've dedicated yourself to this place, and because Richard is here today not as a journalist, but representing investors interested in the center. I thought you should know." As Patricia walked away, Blake remained motionless, a whirlwind of emotions and thoughts flooding him. If what she said was true, it meant he had been manipulated. But did that diminish his guilt? Did it absolve him of what he did to Timmy? From across the garden, he spotted Richard chatting animatedly with Claire and some businessmen. The lawyer, now an influential figure in business circles, thanks to the fame obtained with the viral video, gestured with the ease of someone who is completely at ease. Blake walked determinedly in his direction, but before he could reach him, he felt a hand on his arm. It was old Joe. "Any problem, boy? You look disturbed." Briefly, Blake explained what he had just discovered. He expected to see indignation in the old mariner's eyes, perhaps even a desire to confront Richard. Instead, he saw only calm wisdom. "And does that change anything for you?" asked old Joe. "What do you mean?" "If you were drugged, if you were deceived, if you were manipulated, does that change the path you've chosen since then? Does it change what you've learned about yourself? Does it change the good you've done here?" The words hit Blake deeply. He looked around, at the smiling children with their new canine companions, at the rescued animals that now had purpose and care, at Timmy happily playing with Buddy. "No," he finally answered. "It doesn't change anything." Old Joe nodded. "Then keep that information, But don't let it define your future. What happened, happened. What matters is what we do from now on. The inauguration ceremony began. Claire gave an emotional speech about how a tragedy was almost transformed into a story of hope and redemption. Roger Thompson spoke briefly about the importance of social responsibility. Old Joe thanked everyone on behalf of Timmy. When it came time for Blake to speak, Claire had insisted that he present the rescue and training program for stray dogs. He climbed onto the stage with visible nervousness. He spotted Richard in the audience, the confident smile of someone who feels untouchable. 6 months ago, I didn't know what compassion was, Blake began, his voice initially trembling but gaining firmness. I didn't know the meaning of real consequences, nor did I understand the value of honest work or true connection with other beings. I learned all of this the hard way. His eyes met Richard's for a brief moment before continuing. I learned that true power isn't in controlling others or being above the rules. It's in the ability to recognize our mistakes, to take responsibility for them, and to choose every day to be someone better than we were yesterday. The audience listened in respectful silence. Among them, Patricia watched with tears in her eyes. Roger Thompson, for the first time in months, seemed truly proud of his son. These dogs, Blake pointed to Shadow and other rescued animals, taught me that loyalty and unconditional love don't depend on status or money. And this child, his gaze found Timmy, who smiled in his direction even without being able to see him, taught me the power of authentic forgiveness. I don't deserve any of this, but I promise to work every day to be worthy of the trust you've placed in me. Upon concluding his speech, Blake didn't expect applause. However, one by one those present stood up, initiating an ovation that echoed throughout the center. Richard, visibly uncomfortable, was one of the few who remained seated. When Blake came down from the stage, he was received with a hug from Jack, followed by a firm handshake from Old Joe. Timmy approached, guided by Buddy, and extended his arms toward Blake. Can I meet Shadow today? The boy asked with a big smile. Daddy said he'll be my second dog friend. Blake couldn't contain his emotion. He knelt down to the child's height and with a choked voice replied, Of course, Timmy. Shadow is waiting for you. 1 year after the inauguration of the Buddy Training Center, Newport Cove had been transformed. What began as a local project was now a national reference in assistance dog training. People from all over the country traveled to learn about the work developed there, and other cities were already beginning to implement similar programs. Blake, now director of the Stray Dog Rescue and Rehabilitation Program, lived in a small house near the center. The simplicity of his current life contrasted drastically with the luxury he once considered essential. But there was a peace in his eyes that money had never been able to buy. On a sunny September afternoon, while supervising the training of new dogs, Blake received an unexpected visit. Richard, who had disappeared from Newport shortly after the inauguration, was standing at the main gate, visibly worn down. "Can we talk?" asked the ex-lawyer, without the confident air of before. Blake hesitated. They hadn't spoken since Patricia's revelations, and he had deliberately chosen not to seek confrontation. "Sure," he finally replied, indicating a bench under a leafy tree. They sat in silence for a few moments, observing the center's activities. Children with various disabilities interacted happily with their dogs, while trainers supervised specific exercises. Timmy, now almost 4 years old, was a constant presence, helping with the puppies under the watchful supervision of Buddy and Shadow, his faithful companions. "I lost everything," Richard broke the silence abruptly. "The law firm, credibility, contacts." Blake observed him without commenting, waiting for him to continue. "After the inauguration, a former employee of mine came forward with evidence that I had drugged you that night. She had saved messages where I arranged with the other guys to put something in your drink." "Why?" Blake asked, the only question that still bothered him after all this time. Richard sighed deeply. "Envy, resentment. You always had everything. So easy, Blake. Born with a silver spoon in your mouth, never had to strive for anything. Meanwhile, I was struggling to keep up appearances, going into debt to maintain your lifestyle, being treated like a disposable accessory by you and your circle. So you decided to teach me a lesson? I didn't plan what happened with the boy, Richard hastened to say. I just wanted you to be embarrassed, to make a fool of yourself. I never imagined it would go that far. Blake closed his eyes for a moment, processing the confession. Part of him wanted to feel anger, wanted to blame Richard for the devastating turn his life had taken that night. But the truth was that regardless of the drug, the potential for that horrible act had always been within him, a product of years of arrogance and a sense of impunity. Why are you telling me this now? I'm leaving the country. I got a simple job in Australia. I want to start over, away from the spotlight, from the judgments. But before that, I needed to face you, needed to say that. Richard hesitated, his voice breaking. That I'm sorry, not for what happened to me afterward, but for what I did that night. Blake nodded slowly. I'm not the one who needs your apology, Richard. It's Timmy. It's old Joe. I know. I've already spoken with them. Old Joe said something I can't get out of my head. He said, sometimes we need to lose everything to discover who we really are. The words echoed in Blake. It was exactly what had happened to him. As they talked, Timmy approached, guided by Buddy. The boy, who now knew the center well, moved with impressive ease. Blake, Shadow is looking for you, said the little one, smiling in the approximate direction where he knew Blake would be. I think he wants to show the new trick he learned. I'm coming, Timmy, replied Blake, standing up. Do you remember Richard? The boy tilted his head, thoughtful. The voice is familiar. He came here the other day to talk to Daddy. Yes, it's me, confirmed Richard, visibly moved by the child's presence. I was telling Blake I'm leaving, going to live far away. Are you taking a dog with you? Asked Timmy with the typical innocence of his age. Everyone should have a dog. They see things that we don't see. The simple wisdom of the child left both men momentarily speechless. I'll think about that, Richard finally replied. Maybe that's exactly what I need. After Richard left, Blake accompanied Timmy to the kennel, where Shadow was anxiously waiting. The dog, once distrustful and wary, was now one of the center's most efficient canine trainers, especially with anxious or traumatized children. You know, Blake, said Timmy as they walked, Daddy told me that you threw me into the water once. Is that true? Blake stopped, his heart racing. Although Timmy knew the general story about how the center had begun, the specific details of his involvement had been softened. Yes, Timmy. I did something very wrong, something terrible. And Buddy saved me, right? Yes, he and Jack. I was a very bad person back then. Timmy was silent for a moment, his little face thoughtful. But now you're not bad anymore. Now you save dogs. And the dogs save people like me. The simplicity of that childish logic touched Blake deeply. I'm trying to be better every day, Timmy. Then it's all good, concluded the boy with a smile. Buddy always knows who's good, and he likes you now. That night, after everyone had left, Blake remained alone at the center. He walked slowly through the spaces he had helped build, observing the tangible results of his transformation. It wasn't just a physical place, it was the symbol of how a devastating fall could sometimes be the beginning of a journey of redemption. He sat on the beach adjacent to the center, watching the sea that had once been the setting for the worst moment of his life. The gentle waves reflected the moonlight, creating a spectacle of light and movement. Buddy, who for some reason had decided to follow him, sat by his side, looking in the same direction. You knew from the beginning, didn't you? Blake murmured, stroking the dog's fur. Knew that I needed to change, that there was something in me worth saving. Buddy tilted his head, as if he really understood, his wise eyes fixed on Blake. On the horizon, the lights of fishing boats dotted the darkness, reminding him of Jack, of old Joe, of all the simple people he had once despised and now deeply respected. Blake breathed in the salty air, finally feeling at peace. Timmy's desperate cry that fateful night, which had for so long echoed in his nightmares, had now been replaced by the laughter of the same child playing with his dogs, confident and happy. And in that transformation, Blake found his true redemption. Buddy barked softly as if to confirm his thoughts. In the distance, old Joe's call was heard, looking for the dog. Let's go, Buddy. Time to go home. Blake stood up, shaking the sand from his clothes. As they walked back, Buddy ran ahead, eager to reunite with his family. Blake watched him, amazed at how a simple animal had changed the destiny of so many people, including his own. The Buddy Training Center wasn't just a place where dogs were prepared to assist people with disabilities. It was a living testimony to how life could offer second chances, how forgiveness could be more powerful than resentment, and how the most unexpected bonds could become the most meaningful. Blake took one last look at the sea before closing the gates of the center. The same sea that had witnessed his fall now witnessed his rise, not to the old heights of wealth and power, but to a much more valuable place, that of someone who had finally understood the true meaning of humanity. In the sky, a shooting star cut through the darkness, reflecting in the tranquil waters of the bay. Blake smiled, making a silent wish, not for wealth or redemption, but for the continuation of this journey that had just begun. A journey that, ironically, had started with a desperate cry at sea, and now continued with laughter of joy on solid ground. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit like. Let us know what city you're watching us from.